Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week we spoke to Rocio Castrillon. You know her from her very popular Instagram account, Voice for IBD. She shared her story of being diagnosed with Crohn's disease and how a lack of information really led her to live in silence about her fistulizing disease. We talked to her about how an experience with Team Challenge led her to get a sense of community with our inflammatory bowel disease community and led her to many more volunteer opportunities with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation here in the United States. And that led her to leading a support group for people of Hispanic and Latino descent, many of whom are outside of the United States. And we talked to her about her advocacy work within the Hispanic and Latino community and how that's influenced her position on the National Board of Trustees for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation here in the United States. We had such a great conversation with Rocio. We know you're going to love her just as much as we did. Cheers!
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey, guys. This is Alicia, and we are absolutely so excited to be joined by Rocio Castrillon. But I know I did not get that entirely correct. And since Rocio speaks 3 languages, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in the 3 languages that you know.
Well, thank you both. My name is Rocio Castrillon. Me llamo Rocio Castrillon. Je m'appelle Rocio Castrillon.
Very good. I'm going to give you small golf claps. We are so excited to hear your story and definitely to dive into all of the amazing stuff I know we're going to talk about. But our first very unprofessional question for you is, what are you drinking?
I'm having a little Prosecco. So I'm typically a champagne / bubbly, and Prosecco is the only thing I had today. So I'm a little heartbroken. It's not authentic French, but it'll do.
It always does. Always in a pinch, but a girl after my own heart. I love that. Robin, what are you drinking?
So I don't want you to fall out of your chair when I say this out loud, Alicia, because if anybody has listened, you will know that I've just been drinking water and tea for the longest time. But tonight I want IBD to kiss my ass. So I'm drinking some white wine, a lovely Riesling, not too sweet, from the wonderful state of Washington. Love it. What are you drinking?
I had kiwis. And not only did I have kiwis, but I had the Costco amount of kiwis. And so I definitely was like, oh no, I have to do something with these. So I looked up a kiwi cocktail recipe. And so I don't know what the name of this is, but it's kiwi gin, elderflower liqueur, and it's supposed to have and simple syrup, lime juice, and sparkling water. But since I didn't have lime juice, I used Topo Chico has lime and mint sparkling water. And so since I needed sparkling water anyway, I just put that in place of the lime and the sparkling water. And so shout out to Topo Chico. It's pretty good. Anyway, cheers, guys.
Thank you for joining us.
Cheers. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Next question for you is, tell us your IBD story. What brings you into our community?
Well, my story goes back a little over 20 years. I actually initially presented with perineal fistula, but unbeknownst to me, I actually was seeing with a dermatologist for another just unrelated reason. And I had noticed a bump and I wasn't sure what it was. And so I mentioned it to her and I said, what is this? She says, let me take a look at it. Could be a cyst. Unfortunately, it was not a cyst. And she actually attempted to drain it in the office when I was with her. And I was in excruciating pain. It's literally one of the most horrific things I've gone through. And, when I tell my story, the first 5 years were the most traumatizing because, now I know so much more than what I knew then. So she's kind of not really knowing what to do with me. So she's kind of taken aback and says, I think you should see another doctor. Yeah, obviously. So I basically at that point was referred over to a colorectal surgeon to then determine what it could be. And when I saw my surgeon at the time, he had determined that it was an abscess and also attempted to drain it in clinic, but at least he was, in the right specialty, but still not exactly the right thing to do. The abscess then turned into a fistula. And after a few months' time, I was in pain. Obviously, I wasn't really sure what to do because, I don't know anything about IBD at this point. And little did I know that fistulas were related to IBD. So I'm going through this as a complete, this is all completely unknown to me. And so he determines after trying to put me on antibiotics and then developing allergic reactions to both antibiotics, I ended up agreeing to have surgery. He recommended surgery. He said, let's do a fistulotomy and we'll go ahead with that. You'll heal and, it'll call it a day and that'll be it. Yeah, that did not go as planned. So when I say my anniversary for my Crohn's, I always think about the day of my surgery, which was October 23rd, and that was 2003. So that was my first fasciolotomy. Lo and behold, I did not heal because, again, he wasn't doing the proper thing. And so it took months and months, and I had drainage and I had pain. And, I'm going through this quietly. No one knows anything about what's going on with me because I'm dealing with something that's so intimate and so personal and, just quite honestly embarrassing. So then a few months later, I actually have a trip planned to Europe for a month, and I still go on my trip, and I am suffering through that month. And I come back, and I still remember the first week of June, I had my second surgery. He again repeated a fasciolotomy. And it was only at that point that he then slightly suggested to my parents in the post op, she might have Crohn's. And it was a very looked off his tongue and he walked on his way. That's all he said. And so, I wish I knew then what I know now, because had we then been able to ask questions, had he even told me that word, it would have helped me better understand, let me Google what Crohn's is. So, time continues to go on and I'm not healing. And, basically I go through a lot on a personal level in the next few years. And I go back to him, literally, it's 5 years from their first surgery, and I'm in pain and I'm suffering and I never healed. I go to his office and I am basically crying, just desperate at this point. I need help. And he was not very open to helping and providing any help. And so he suggested I see a surgeon that he wrote on a post-it note and sent me on my way. He had no qualms with literally just basically discharging me as a patient and not, no longer wanting to treat me. At that time it was all paper records. And so I went ahead and got all copies of all my records and took it to my colorectal surgeon, who is at the academic institution that I'm at now. And, I get an appointment with him. He looks through all my records and he immediately says, I have Crohn's disease. This is indicative of Crohn's disease. And I look at him, again, he's like, has no one told you this? I'm like, no, that's why I'm here. And so he then determines, we're going to do an exam under anesthesia to confirm. And, about a month or so later after I see him, we do that. I do get confirmed biopsies that I have Crohn's. So it was December 2008 that I finally had my diagnosis after having my first surgery, October 2003. So after that, I was then transferred over to my gastroenterologist. So at the start of 2009, I began care with her. I'm still with my same provider. And thank goodness I've had an incredible medical team since then that is IBD specialized. And that is the one thing that I have regrets, but again, I had no knowledge of, is I wish I would have known what IBD was so that I would have been properly seen by an IBD specialist, because the colorectal surgeon that I saw was unfortunately not specialized. And without knowing, the details of, what can commonly occur with Crohn's disease, it was like he was just treating me like any other patient. And so as soon as, I began, my first visit with my gastroenterologist, we went through an extensive medical history. And again, there's so many things that I wish I knew then. She did a full blood work panel, and I was deficient in absolutely everything. And had anybody in the last 5 years done blood work on me, we would have been able to see, oh, that's a sign. So basically at that point, I ended up starting, she talked to me about, my treatment options. I still obviously had fistulas at that point. I was fearful of biologics because, especially back then, this is 2009 at this point, I'm not sure what to do, make this big decision on the future of my life. And so I start with 6MP, which was a 6-month process that unfortunately my body didn't metabolize it well. And I was feeling worse and it was not healing my fistulas. And then decided, after that trial period, I decided, okay, it's time to try a biologic. So I did transition into a biologic, and I started it probably late October, early November. And I still to this day remember Thanksgiving of that year, this is where I get emotional. I was able to tell my family that I finally had healed, my fistulas had healed. And, it was just after living for 5 years like this, it was unbelievable to me that a medication like a biologic had literally healed my fistulas. And so probably, within a few months time or so, my doctor then did a colonoscopy to, kind of see what was going on. And she brought in a colleague to, kind of basically, I think he specializes, I don't know, I don't recall who he was, but he specializes in, determining, the patient's previous history. And he literally said to her, why did you call me into this case? She doesn't have any history of fistulas, because they had healed so, perfectly. And so it was just shocking. I mean, I look back at what those 5 years were versus, my story now, which, is still complicated, but, those were definitely the hardest years. I, was quiet about it. I never told people about it. I lived kind of a secret life, if you will, where, I was kind of dressing differently, kind of trying to hide what I was going through, because how do you explain something you don't know you have? And if I would have known that it was Crohn's disease, I could have told people, oh, this is, I have something, manifestation of Crohn's. And, I could have explained it in a better way, but I really didn't have an explanation. So, I always say I suffered in silence for 5 years, until my diagnosis. At that time, I had coincidentally found out about the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. And I say that because, I always think like things work in mysterious ways. I'd gone to a yoga class for the immune system. It was literally December 2008, so right when my diagnosis occurred. I went to a yoga class for the immune system because it just sounded interesting. And there was a staff member from the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation there talking about Team Challenge. And I picked up her card and learned about, what Team Challenge was. And at that point, I think because we had heard the word Crohn's, I thought, well, may as well find out a little bit more. And I still remember I sent her an email shortly thereafter, after I got my diagnosis, a few weeks later, and I tell her I was diagnosed. And so I share that because I literally decided, I remember the New Year's of that year, I had my diagnosis, didn't know what my next steps were, but I decided I was going to run a half marathon the following year. That had always been a personal goal of mine. And it was something I'd always wanted to do, just one of those personal accomplishments. And, I always feel like the stars aligned for me to have met this staff member to be able to connect with her and then run my first half marathon in June 2009 in Kona, Hawaii. So not a bad place to be. It was also my first way of sharing. I was fundraising for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and obviously, telling my story and being surrounded by teammates and fellow patients who I now had as a community that was around me. So I'm grateful, for that year, because I feel like had I not had that in that first year after my official diagnosis, I think things could have kind of, turned in a different way. But I've always said, like, I was happy when I got my diagnosis because, it brought me into, doing a lot of the work I'm doing now. And it just has made me realize there's a lot of positive aspects to living with a disease, and it's made me grow as a person. So over the years of, I was on a biologic. I actually at one point developed latent TB. So I had to be pulled off of my biologic and go through a 9-month TB treatment plan, which was not fun. And it was kind of then and, in the years thereafter that I've realized how complex IBD can be and, the things that can occur, all the potential what ifs, unfortunately, have always been true for me. I tend to now be a very complex patient. And if there's a potential side effect or symptom, I will have it. I'll have allergic reactions. And, and I think it's all because of my immune system and, the fact that I'm living with Crohn's disease. Like I've mentioned, that I initially started with perineal fissulas. And so, my anatomy had basically been altered with my surgeries. And so I, for years, was actually struggling with constipation because I had such a narrow area in the rectum where, I'd had surgeries, had developed scar tissue. And basically I was going through constipation when I'm hearing about Crohn's disease being, primarily diarrhea. So, in a way I was confused because I'm hearing one thing, but dealing with another and trying to understand, how I was facing it differently. And again, I realize now how different each one of us is. And so I want to say it was in 2015, I actually ended up having a strictureplasty to basically kind of open up the area where so much scar tissue had developed. And that luckily did help, kind of alleviate things. I guess I should also mention, so during this time where I was undiagnosed, of course I was living with active disease, but we didn't know that. And so in my initial scopes, my doctor had found a narrowing in my ileum. I had a stricture, and we determined basically that it was likely fibrosis at that point versus active inflammation because, I went undiagnosed for 5 years. So I'm sure it was just developing and narrowing more and more. So I was fortunate in a way because I lived with that stricture for many years until 2020 when I had an ileocectomy or resection. I unfortunately had a lot of personal traumas going on at the end of 2019 and I flared. I had a major obstruction. I was hospitalized. And then the start of 2020, we decided it was now time for me to finally have surgery. Well, as we all know, a global pandemic also began in the start of 2020. And so unfortunately for me, my surgery was delayed all the way until September, which meant 9 months of not only living in isolation because of the pandemic, but also living with obstructions. I candidly say, COVID was almost the least of my worries at that time because I was dealing with so much on a personal level. I could eat for a few days and then just have an obstruction. But, I also didn't want to go to the hospital. or the emergency room at the worst time of the pandemic. And so I basically went through, obstructions, obviously contacting my medical team so they're aware. And I would go on a liquid diet and I, just kind of went through that fluctuation of flaring, not flaring, flaring, not flaring for 9 months. That was also the year I lost 25 pounds, which I say this again now more openly, but when people are complimenting you because you've lost weight, when you are miserable and you are suffering, and it's like, you really think my weight loss is my choice? And I think perceptions, unfortunately, with IBD, we obviously always candidly say it's an invisible illness until it becomes visible. And then people maybe realize it. But even then, I don't think they realize the complexity of it. I mean, the only reason I lost 25 pounds is because I was not eating, and that's not healthy. Unfortunately, that, did lead to a number of complications with my surgery. My surgery itself went well, but my post-op recovery was very challenging. Ended up hospitalized for 11 days because I basically was so malnutrition going into surgery, and it led to a lot of complications that I'm still living with today. A lot of neuromuscular issues, and yeah, that's a whole like laundry list of issues that I face. And again, I wish I knew as much as, and again, over these past few years, I guess I've learned even more, but I wish I knew all these things leading up to surgery where I could have better prepared for, being in a better place from a nutrient perspective to go into surgery so that I wouldn't have to face what I did thereafter. The good news is ever since 2020, I've had 2 scopes and they've both overall been very good. We use the word remission, lightly. There's still like slight inflammation here, slight inflammation there, but overall, when I'm asymptomatic for the most part and, my scopes look good and overall, things appear to be good, then, it's like I can't complain, especially after everything that I have gone through. So I am in a good place now, luckily, and obviously can talk about all of my journey in a much more open way. But like I said, I mean, for so many years, there was so much of my journey that I just didn't want to share and, would have never used the words, fishla or, just talked openly with people about it. And I think that's kind of helped me when I say like the positive that have come from living with IBD. It's being able to talk openly, being able to be that person that someone else can talk to if they're dealing with the same thing that I went through, and also give hope. Because I think when I say, when my fistula is healed that quickly with a biologic, I certainly an exception to the rule. I do feel like it's not always the case, but I also can tell someone my fistula is healed within a month after, having them for 5 years. So it can happen. And I think that's, also what I try to do is, really provide patients perspective with the opportunity that lies ahead. I mean, I think, I mentioned having run with Team Challenge that first year of my diagnosis. I never would have thought I was going to run that half marathon, let alone multiple half marathons thereafter. And, you don't realize all that you can accomplish when you're faced with such setbacks with IBD that, it's almost hard to look ahead. But when I'm able to look back at things, especially where I'm at now, it's so much easier to think like, yeah, I was in a very rough patch. And obviously there's emotions that come out still from those years that were harder. But I also think but there's so much good that's come from it. So I think that sums it up.
Okay. Fun fact. My first Team Challenge race was Kona in 2011.
Oh,
so
I'm bummed we weren't there together.
I know. And then I proceeded to do that race 2 more times. So I did Kona 3 years in a row.
Oh my gosh.
Because I mean, why not go to Hawaii and fundraise for an excellent cause?
I know. Exactly.
I was going to ask you if that was your race as well. Oh, a bummer. Okay. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what a beautiful place to run.
We've had to have been at the same race at the same time. I've done, I don't know, like 13 or 14 or 15 Team Challenge events.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I haven't done that many.
That's what I'm saying. We have to have been at least at the same event at least once. Yeah. I've done a lot of them.
I feel accomplished by running 1 half marathon, and Robin's like, I've done 14. Step back, Alicia.
That's just with Team Challenge. Well, okay. Let me qualify before we get. I have not done one since February of 2018 when I did Surf City, because that's when everything happened and my new flare started and my diagnosis changed from ulcerative colitis to Crohn's and, all of that stuff. So I have not, well, that's not true, because after my surgery, like a crazy person, I did Surf City again in 2021. No, 2021.
I don't even know.
It had to be 2022 because I was still in the middle of surgery in 2021. Yes, like a crazy person. So I did do that, but this time I will train and be healthy next time I do a half marathon. But
was about to call you on it. I'm like,
I know.
excuse me,
Yeah,
ma'am.
I did.
I
like
remember.
a total crazy person. Total crazy person. Okay, we should ask questions now.
It's not about Team Challenge. It's about
It's not.
Rocio.
That's right.
I want to back up a teeny bit because, I mean, listen, okay. Nobody said Crohn's disease to you for like 5 fucking years.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to,
Astounding.
Well,
Astounding.
yeah.
I'm like,
And
I'm
I
trying
think
to get over this.
had I been able to Google Crohn's, I could have found information about Crohn's lab,
Yes.
in a fish lab. But no, I mean, I didn't know the term. All I did find information about fishlets, but they weren't associated with Crohn's, at least from, the Google search I was doing back in the day.
I'm going to try to get over that one. It's going to take a little bit, but
It will.
I do want to just I'm so mad for you right now.
I know,
listen,
it's crazy.
I came in a little bit fired up anyway, and now I'm just going to be mad about something different. I'm going to try to get over being angry. However, I do want to back up a teensy bit because one of the things you wrote on your questionnaire that didn't come up here in your introduction though is that you originally are from Peru, so thus your parents are also from Peru. I'm going to make the guess that they are not native English speakers.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm really curious, like, did they know anything about this? Like when Crohn's finally came into play 5 years later, did they have any idea what this was? I mean, and also like when this doctor kind of casually throws out words and like all these people, like all of this is presumably in English, which again, not their native language. And so there could be some miscommunication that
or
they
lost
may
in
have felt
translation.
happened. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for reminding me because I actually have brought that up. I've had this conversation in kind of a greater like panel discussion because my parents are from Peru. I was actually born in Peru myself. And so I grew up speaking both English and Spanish, but my parents came to the US, initially speaking Spanish and then learned English. So it is their second language and, they have accents. And I think that's something that I've always struggled with, to be quite honest, because obviously I speak fluently. And so whenever there's any doctor, whether it's my own or one of theirs, I feel like they will talk to me and address me because I'm not the one, who has an accent. And so, again, at the time when I was going through my surgery and the surgeon is talking to them about my maybe Crohn's disease diagnosis in a very, whisper, if you will. Of course, they don't know what he's saying and they just want to know that I'm alive, like basically that I woke up post-operatively I was just under anesthesia. They want to know that I'm okay. And then, that I'm going to heal and that their daughter will be better. So, yeah, I mean, I think that is, it's a huge gap in, not necessarily that they needed to have a translator there. I mean, they speak English, but, maybe asking the questions, do you have any questions? Is there anything that we can provide you? Or, being able to just make sure that what has been stated has come across and understood. Because, the unfortunate part is, we can nod and shake our heads and say like, oh, sure, yeah, and not understand what that means. Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis are completely unknown in Latin America, or they were then. They are definitely known now. But, even when I got my diagnosis, 5 years later, my parents didn't believe me. Not so much me, but didn't believe that I had this diagnosis. They didn't quite understand how their daughter, and I have no family history of it, how their daughter had a disease that they never heard of. And that also was, at that point, there is very low incidence rate in South America, which is where we're from. And I think the hard part was that, we're now at this point, really it was me trying to get information and then being able to adapt that information so that they could better understand it. I do remember I had at one point been hospitalized and we had a colorectal fellow who spoke Spanish. He was from Argentina and we started talking about we're from Peru and all of a sudden I still remember he's drawing on the whiteboard what's going on with me for that hospitalization and explaining everything to my mom in Spanish because it just helped elaborate kind of what the complication was at that point in time. And it was basically due to my my kind of ongoing constipation because this was before the strictureplasty. And, just the fact that he was able to explain that and kind of draw it literally for us to better, kind of get a better understanding. And I think, we still talk about him now because he was there only for a short time. And, it just was that like added touch of they speak English, they understand, but here's a little bit more. And I think that's a big area that is severely lacking. I mean, again, I always say that I am privileged because I am in an academic institution that is IBD specialized. I speak the language. I'm able to advocate for myself, but that's not always the case. And I think especially, Latin American patients are fearful of medical providers. They don't like to question providers. They don't feel comfortable. They don't feel, and I say they because I'm not that way. I most certainly will question a lot of things, especially after what I've gone through. But, the hard part is that that becomes a pattern and that becomes a norm. And so if the healthcare system knows that Hispanic or Latino patients won't question what's being raised, then the system continues to be what it is, which unfortunately is not ideal. And so, especially, in the world of IBD that I'm, obviously much more familiar with now, there's improvement, but still such a huge lack of resources and communication and just really a better understanding of the diseases. Because again, the prevalence is not nearly as high as it is in the US. And so there's still some unknowns as to, does this person really have it or not? To be quite honest, I have since found out that I have extended family members with IBD, but even then it's a very no one really talks about it.
I think what a lot of people don't realize, though, is especially in some of these academic institutions, they do have people whose whole job is to do medical translation. So even if you speak great English, but it's not your first language, it's still sometimes helpful to have somebody come in that can take these medical terms and translate them, because medical speak is not everyday speak. So even people who are native, I don't know other languages, certainly not well, and even I'm like, what was that word? What exactly are you saying? And then I'll go and Google it when I get home. But there are people whose job is to literally understand how to take these concepts and the words and terms and be able to translate them. So, even understanding that this is something you can ask for, even if you think you're going to get it 99.8% of the time, still that just chance that there's something you might miss, I think is kind of helpful to folks. I didn't realize that this was a whole, literally there's people that this is their job, is to learn how to do medical terms and translate them. That's so cool. I love that.
And in multiple languages. I mean, I know it does exist in a number of languages, but unfortunately, that's not always a known fact.
It's not, and it's not everybody has it either. I would imagine that probably where you live, there's probably, but maybe in North Dakota where I grew up, no, where Robin lives, probably not.
No, I mean, not in the tiny little town that I live in, but in the surrounding area. I am only an hour away from an actual city.
Yes. Okay. I mean, okay. See, but now you got me wondering. I'm like, is it a lack of prevalence? I know one of the things that they sort of are researching is that, especially in some countries that have different diets, or that whatever, that the more the Western diet is being introduced, that now we're seeing higher rates of inflammatory bowel disease. I'm like, is that it? Or is it that because it's not as common there, it's not as recognized when it may show up kind of situations, like chicken or egg?
Yeah, I know that there's definitely work being done to research the immigration. My brother was he's older than me. He was born in the US, and my parents went back to Peru with him, which is why I was born. I had family members that were ill at the time. And so they went back. And so he is completely healthy and does not have Crohn's. So, but his initial upbringing was in the US. And so, there is some trying to figure out, was it because of his original upbringing, the first few years of his life? Did his microbiome develop differently? Was it different for him? Because for me, we moved back to the US when I was 6 months old. So I was still, my mom was still breastfeeding me at the time. And then because of the big move, family move to the US, she stopped nursing me. And so that's another thing too, where, I candidly say there's a lot of things just in the difference between our births. My brother was a vaginal birth. I was a C-section. And then I was not breastfed, as long as ideally we would have, just because of the transition. And so I think a lot of that has kind of played a factor in the development of the IBD in me. Obviously, there's genes, but I think the triggers were another part of that. And then I also, when we first came to the US and I was, a young child, I was actually having random infections, ear infection, this infection, and I was getting antibiotics all the time. So I now have multiple factors that we know that are being studied right now that I think would be the cause of with the environmental, with the antibiotic use, and then my, kind of my original, or I guess, my birth/nursing first year.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. And so much research is being done in all these different areas to try to figure out kind of what is this constellation? Because it's definitely not if you've never been breastfed, you automatically are going to get inflammatory bowel disease. It's a piece of a bigger puzzle, because otherwise, frankly, every child that was born in the late 70s would have inflammatory bowel disease, because that was the time when breast milk was bad and formula was great. So, and granted, that is a group of people that probably have a lot of autoimmune conditions. So interesting. I want to stay here for a little while longer, because one of the things you wrote in your questionnaire, in addition to being from Peru, is also just that you have used this diagnosis and all of the things that you've learned as a platform to get involved in advocacy work and really sort of highlighting the needs of the Hispanic and Latino community and resources there and education and things like that. So talk to us about your work there and all the fantastic things you do.
Sure. So I guess I'll kind of start in the sense that, with there not being a lot of prevalence from the Hispanic Latino community, there is stigma. There's stigma with any type of disease. And, I mentioned candidly that my parents didn't really believe that I had Crohn's disease, even though we had it documented that I now had a real diagnosis. But they just kind of didn't want to believe it because that's kind of the mentality. And so I've realized, even with my own family, where I've had to kind of reiterate and communicate, like over communicate what this disease means, even though it's not visible, even though I may not be in a flare, I still am living with a autoimmune disease that is a very complex disease for the rest of my life. And when I realized that, not only with my own family, but then when I look beyond that in the Hispanic Latino community, I mean, this is the case. Every single time that I connect with a patient who is of a Latino descent, I mean, it's the exact same thing. It's this, we candidly laugh at what our parents have said to us. Some of the same, literally the exact same words of, well, you look fine, or try that, like home remedies and things that, in the past may have worked for other diseases, but certainly will not work for IBD. And so, a big part of my kind of evolution into advocacy work, especially with the Hispanic Latino community, has been, first of all, breaking the stigma, because I am now a Hispanic voice and faith that, I'm happy to be out there and to speak publicly in English or Spanish, to be able to have people understand, like, I look the same as another Latino patient that may realize, oh, this is actually okay. And it's accepted because I'm speaking about it. And again, I'm speaking about it in a way that's optimistic, and I think that's a big part of what I always try to do is, yes, I've gone through a lot, but there's a lot that's come from it. And I think that's the part where in the Hispanic Latino population, it gets lost, is they dwell in the negative and don't look at the positive. And so, over the years, I've been involved in a number of ways doing, advocacy work and volunteering and mentoring. And in the last few years, I've realized there's such a gap in having Hispanic patient advocates that are able to not only share our story and share it very openly, but also be able to communicate some of those things that a lot of the community isn't able to. I currently moderate a Spanish support group that is virtual. It's offered virtually. And we have, I'd say, probably a greater majority of the support group members being international. Most everybody is coming from a different Latin American country that they don't have anyone to turn to. And so, every time I speak to patients and realize, like, there's just it's almost it's a desperation of looking for help, commonality, not just in language, but it's just, again, that understanding that we can relate with one another. One of the aspects that, is very frustrating as a Hispanic patient. And, again, a lot of this has changed over the years, but, early on, you start getting your handouts, and, for initial diagnosis, you get handouts of what you should be eating and what you should not be eating. And, just all these suggestions that don't fall in line with culturally who we are and how we eat and, the way that we live our lives. And I think, I still remember, like, getting a lot of those and just being so dismissive of them, because I'm like, this doesn't even come into play. This isn't how I eat. This isn't the food I've grown up with. And it's certainly not how I'm going to adapt my way of life now that I have this disease. And, again, a lot of that has improved and is very much a work in progress. I've been fortunate to be involved in different ways with some projects that I'm hoping will come to fruition in the very near future to help Hispanic Latino patients that will really kind of open the eyes of the greater IBD community, because we are unique in a lot of ways. And although, yes, we may all take the same medications, and we may, there may be a lot of similarities, go through the same surgeries, but there's cultural aspects of living with IBD that I think there's just such a need to better understand. So I began a lot more my public, I say public facing because I've always done advocacy work, but just in a private way. But I began Voice for IBD at the end of 2022 during Crohn's and Colitis Awareness Week. And I realized, this is my time to put myself out there, be a Hispanic Latino representation of Crohn's disease and be able to be a voice for IBD patients globally. I mean, I'm grateful that I decided on the Voice for IBD as my handle, because I do feel like there's so many different voices that are out there that are, advocating for different reasons, not just in the IBD world, but I think that, as a Hispanic Latino voice, personally, I can and will make a difference because I'm seeing that, in just the last couple of years of the work that I've been doing. I've been intentional about trying to do work in Spanish exclusively and also doing both, bilingual work as well, because a lot of us are bilingual, or in my case, trilingual. But, I do feel that for as much as there is, a lot of information out there in English, there's still not enough information in Spanish. And I think that's the aspect that I feel just we need to keep working on, because a simple translation is not going to work, but a true adaptation of Hispanic work is important. I mean, I think it's not just a matter of, Google Translate a document, but rather how can we, demonstrate that there is a Hispanic female patient that somebody may relate to and that speaks Spanish and that shares her story, and I think, the more that I continue to do that, I think I can only hope it will help. I mean, in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of writing, and there was an article that I was actually interviewed for a couple of years ago, and the discussion was about, Hispanic patients have a delayed diagnosis. And within that, as part of the article, some of the research that was within it was the fact that Hispanic patients actually have a higher prevalence of perianal fistula, perianal disease. So now I find out years later, I mean, this is 2021 or 20, I think it was 2021 when the article came out, that, I'm now reading this and I'm thinking, well, now this all makes sense. Okay, not only do I have this disease, but it also makes sense why I have perianal disease, because it is more prevalent in the Hispanic population. And, again, I'm glad that there is research being done and there's a lot of commitment to the Hispanic Latino community. But I think it needs to go beyond where it's at now. And, I'm hopeful that as an advocate, I can do that. And also, we're working with healthcare providers in the IBD space. I mean, I think together we need to work to really open the eyes of the entire IBD community.
I'm going to ask you a question that you may not be able to answer. So just because you said the research into this, it made me think of people participating in research and a hesitancy and a mistrust of the medical community. And I'm wondering if this is not clinical trials. This is just research into like data, right? This is data mining, compiling, because they're not participating to find this information that you're just talking about. They're not like participating in a clinical trial to find that information.
Right.
Do you find that there aren't as many Hispanic in the Hispanic Latino community that participate in this kind of research because of the mistrust?
Yeah, I definitely think that it's a multiple aspects. There is mistrust. There's also the lack of awareness. Like, I think again, if the information is not being readily made available in both languages, unless someone is fluent in English as well, there's that. I also think it's, a lot of the research is being done in, very major metros. And I think not every single Hispanic IBD patient lives within there. And so, personally, I am always volunteering to be involved with research because, it actually really devastates me when I look at outcomes of research and I look at the minuscule percent of the pie chart that represents the Hispanic population. And I think it's not that we, for example, I participated in a couple of the recent IBD COVID studies. And I mean, the majority of the population within those pie charts were Caucasian descent. And, it's unfortunate to think that, of course, I was made aware of it. I wanted to participate. I was very, adamant about participating. But, why can't we better understand the Hispanic population? Well, it's because they're not included in the research and they're also not being targeted to be included in the research. I'd love to know what the differentiating factor is on why my response perhaps to either COVID or the COVID vaccine might be different than someone else. And I wish that there was information available to me. And, and I say that because we all just went through a pandemic, but there's so many areas of, of the disease that I think I'd love to learn more about. And there's just not, I don't think there's enough targeting towards the Hispanic population. There's not a lot of trust and also accessibility. I mean, if someone needs to drive to go to a facility, can't be done virtually or, can't be done at home. I mean, I think there's also consideration of access to care. Can somebody get to a hospital, to a lab, for example? Do they need childcare? Are they working? And I think, again, we have to look at the entire population as a whole. I feel like I say this a lot, but I do feel like I have been privileged in a lot of ways. I have had a career. I've had private health insurance. I've had, a vehicle to drive and, all aspects that has allowed me to have the healthcare that I have. But that's not the case for everybody. And I think, when I work on a lot of the Hispanic and Latino IBD work, it's become so much more important to me because I'm almost like an exception to that role because that's not always the case. And I think that we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think it is super impactful to have you as the at voice of IBD, because I do think it's helpful to remind people that that IBD is not just a single voice. There are so many people that are affected by this. And so I think that's really awesome. I am curious, as you've been facilitating this support group and getting people from all over the place to, call in some sort of radio show. Not
Zoom in.
Like, I know, Zoom in. I'm like, who am I? I'm like 80 years old suddenly. Like, I'm
Hey kids,
Rick
get off Alicia's
Dees.
lawn.
Exactly. I'm Rick Dees. All right. As you get people to Zoom in to your support group, are there trends? Are there patterns that you're seeing? Like, despite any of this, are there things that are sort of like common that you've noticed?
Well, I guess the things that are common that are unfortunate is access to treatment options. In the US, we are very fortunate. We have every possible medication available to us. We also have healthcare insurance. For the most part, there's basically a lot of opportunities to have insurance, either private or through an employer or whatnot. And I think those are areas where I find that a lot of patients internationally don't have the good fortune of having insurance and or access to treatments. So a lot of times, it feels like there's a lot of desire to be on a medication that they know, because there's trust in that. I think that's the part that's good, is there's trust that they know medications exist. They just don't know how to access them. And, to be honest, I've had a few patients, one really expressed interest in clinical trials and lives in a different country and wanted to come to the US for trials. So, just the fact that, there's opportunity here. And I think that's the aspect that, I wish that we could branch out even more to try to help more patients. I also have another patient that has recently, moved to the US to be able to access, the healthcare system and be able to be seen by providers that are specialized in IBD. That is another area that is lacking, and I hate to call out the things that are commonalities, but unfortunate ones, but there's not a lot of IBD specialists. And if there are, there's one in the major metro area or major, the capital of the country, but it's 3-4 hours away. So not everybody has access, to the one IBD specialist in the country, for example. The aspect that I think is very common and just in the, like candid way is that I'd say we all have a very and this I guess does come from a cultural thing where we do want to kind of fix our disease. And we think that we can try to do it in a lot of ways that are not through treatment options. And, and I think there's a lot of belief in kind of like the mentality that, maybe what our family members are saying might be true, or maybe this may help. And so I think it may also come from mistrust a bit, but, I think that we want to kind of manage our disease, and the things that we do know may or may not work, but we certainly attempt them. And I think that, I hear that, I guess, pretty consistently where, we're trying different things because, our grandmother said this, or, or family member said that. So
Do you think that's just kind of common for people that are living with chronic illnesses, is just to kind of be like, you know what, it's probably not going to hurt me, so why not? Because it is an aspect of trying to control it and doing the thing that you can do. Like, you can't necessarily make your doctor prescribe a certain medicine or force your insurance company to give it to you. That's the other part of it. It's like, okay, but I can drink bone broth for a week and see what happens, So
right.
I do think that people kind of do it. Not that I'm advocating for that, people, just going to put that out there. But I think the other thing that is interesting here is, as you're talking to people, it's helpful for companies that are developing medications to also recognize and understand that not everybody is going to be in a place where they have access to it because of the delivery mechanism. If you're living, I mean, frankly, even I grew up in rural North Dakota, and it wasn't so rural that we couldn't get it, but there was kids that I knew that had to be bussed in to go to school, that they don't live near a clinic, they don't live near a doctor, they don't live near an infusion center, or even just people who live in the South that maybe have to have their medications delivered to their doorstep, and it's too flippin' hot, and they can't be home when they're delivered. And so they sit on their doorstep and spoil, so the sort of concept of understanding that not everybody has the same access to the infrastructure that allows for these other types of treatments, that sometimes that's why orals have to be the best option, so just the fact that you can sort of take this awareness, this information that you're sort of gathering from this group, and sort of just be like, hey, pharma folk, check this out. Thank you for answering that. I was just curious, if there was kind of some stuff that had come out. You mentioned being involved in Teen Challenge, and you mentioned your work sort of in advocating for the Hispanic and Latino community, but that has also led for you to have a deeper involvement with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. So talk a little bit about how did you start doing even more with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and now your new role, because you were just not too long ago, joined the ranks of the Board of Trustees, the National Board of Trustees even. Tell us about that.
Yes. Thank you. I guess kind of to backtrack with, my involvement with Teen Challenge, like I said, at the time, I didn't know anybody who had IBD. And so I now, as we always say with one another, it's our Teen Challenge family that you develop and is now my TC family forever. And as I got to know more patients and got to know more about the foundation, I realized, I could get more involved in different ways, both on a local level and a national level. And I think, the aspect that has always been interesting to me is that, of course, I am fundraising in different ways for the foundation through the different races that I've run. And yet at the same time, it's been a privilege to be able to see the impact of what's happening within the foundation. And I say that because one of the roles that I absolutely love that I always talk about is being a stakeholder reviewer for the grants committee for the foundation. So I am able to see the work that's coming in, the proposals that are coming into the foundation and are looking to get funded. And as a patient stakeholder, I have a voice in those meetings, and I'm basically one of those voices that's able to determine what is getting funded. It's been something that I've absolutely loved being a part of, because not only does it give me an insider's view to the research that's coming, of course, it's all confidential until it comes to fruition. But because I've been doing that for so long, I've seen a lot of the work come to life. And it's absolutely thrilling to see not only the commitment that the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has to research, but just the IBD, all the researchers themselves. Every single proposal that we see is incredible, and the amount of uniqueness to it all. I mean, the different aspects of the research. And so that aspect has been really important to me. And so again, that's been a big part of my involvement with the foundation. And that's kind of grown throughout the years, where I started being involved with different advisory task forces and just getting to know a lot of different areas of the foundation, because I'm so passionate as a patient myself, but really for the better of the future of the IBD. I've just kind of almost branched out in kind of every aspect of the foundation. And then, like I said, I began my, more patient advocacy work. And, over the years, I guess that's not gone unnoticed, because I was nominated for the National Board of Trustees. To be honest, getting that call, it was not only, a true honor, but it was, I guess, a testament to the work I've been doing, which was by no means ever done for any reason other than I care about every single IBD patient. And I realize the impact that I have had and that I can continue to have. So yes, I was inducted into the National Board of Trustees in March of this year. And it's an incredible opportunity to sit literally at the table making decisions for the future of IBD patients. I think having a patient perspective in board meetings, in all the decision making that's happening within the foundation, will hopefully truly evolve the work that the foundation does, and ultimately the IBD community. I mean, I am obviously very proud to be intimately involved with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, but they're also partnering with different companies that are so committed to the IBD world. And I think when you see that commitment that comes not only from the foundation but from everybody else, as a patient, it not only excites me, but it also makes me realize they're listening. And I think that's ultimately what matters to me, is that if I can speak up and be a voice, someone will hear me. And whether it comes, to fruition in the next year or 5 years or in 10 years, ultimately, to know that I'm making an impact, is what matters to me. And I mean, it is an honor for me to be on the national board, and, and I hope that I can serve patients, as best as possible.
Well, and I mean, I would say it's an honor for them to have you on the board, because you are able to bring a perspective to the board that is very, very much needed. And so I think, it's not, the honor is not just a one-way honor. I think it's you being able to bring that perspective is incredibly valuable. And how flippin' cool is it to be on the research committee? Like, I just think that would be so much fun, to hear all of the different proposals and hear like all this creativity that is happening. Like, it really is cool. I mean, that's one of the things that I really like about the United States Crohn's and Colitis Foundation is they have this, sort of, their IBD Ventures, which is, investing in kind of research that is different and unique, and, something that would bring kind of different types of things to the IBD community directly, in addition to also research that's, more into the traditional kind of medicines side of the world. And so I do think that's, something that I think is to be very proud of, and something that I think I'm very excited that you're a part of that. So
First of all, thank you so, so much for being on the show, finally, and for sharing so openly about everything that you have experienced with your journey. But unfortunately, it's time for me to ask our last question. And that is, what is your one piece of advice for the IBD community?
I'd say the greatest piece of advice that I have to remind myself is to have hope. There's hope in what the future of IBD looks like, but I think not just on a, on a scientific level, but I think on a personal level. And, I shared areas of my life where, I've obviously gone through a lot and it's been challenging. And of course you may dwell in the negative in the moment, but I think there's so many positives that have come from me living with IBD, and I wouldn't be the woman that I am today if it weren't for my disease. And I think, that's the part that I'm most proud of, is who I've become and, who I may be in the future still. I mean, and I think that there's just, trying to really dwell on the positive, because there are a lot of positives. And I think getting to know both of you and getting to know everybody that I know in the IBD community has been a part of that. And I think that's the part that has become very important to me, because we all get each other. And I think at the end of the day, when we do have those days, and it's okay to have those days, we need, someone or multiple someones to connect with and to relate to. And, I think it's just not living in that moment. I think it's getting past that, understanding that you're overcoming, those challenging times and looking at what lies ahead. And I think, another aspect that has become important to me, obviously, is the advocacy work that I'm doing. And I think, not being afraid to share aspects of your journey that, you may have been fearful about or embarrassed about. I think it's important to talk about them. And I've always said, if me sharing areas of my journey that might help one other patient, that's enough. And I think I've had those encounters already where I've met patients that it's been significant, and it just warms you up inside because you realize you are making a difference, whether it's big or small.
Thank you for that. I really needed to hear you say that about hope, because I've been falling into this trap of like waiting for a shoe to drop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like when you go through something really hard, really recent, it's really hard to just embrace, like, I feel really good right now. Even though I might not feel really good in a week or a month or a year,
Yeah.
I feel really good right now. And I've been in a little bit of a cycle. So thank you for that reminder.
See, Rocio, you've already helped one person already, and you
I'm done.
haven't even
All right,
ended
I'm
this episode yet. Exactly. Mic drop and then leave. We're going to try this one. So I'm going to ask you the same question in Spanish and have you answer in Spanish, just in case we have at least two people listening that speak Spanish. So, ¿cuál es el único consejo que tienes para la comunidad? How did I do?
Bien. Gracias por preguntarme en español. Sí, no, está bien. Creo que el consejo más grande que puedo responder es no perder la fe y no perder la esperanza. La enfermedad inflamatoria intestinal es complicado y siempre lo va a ser y siempre vamos a vivir con esta enfermedad, pero no es el fin del mundo y tenemos mucho por adelante, y eso es lo que uno tiene que pensar y recordarse, porque es algo que uno tiene muchos momentos difíciles y es difícil mantener la positividad, pero al mismo tiempo yo mismo puedo decir que soy un ejemplo de he pasado momentos tan complicados y tan difíciles, pero estoy aquí y estoy haciendo lo más que pueda para la comunidad de la EII en inglés y en español. You got that?
Sí, gracias. Muy, muy bien. I understood bits and pieces of that, so I think I kind of got the gist, but thank you. I hope that we do have some people that will hopefully listen to that and appreciate the Spanish version of your advice. So, Rocio, it's such a pleasure. I mean, we had a chance to meet you officially in January, and it was so much fun to have dinner with you and get a chance to get to know you then. But obviously, we did not go into the nitty gritty of everything over dinner. And so it was so nice to hear your story and get a chance to talk to you again and learn more about your sort of journey. I hate that word.
We hate that word, journey.
Oh, we got to come up with something.
I know.
else.
And I was like, what do I use? I
know.
Yeah.
And it always comes back to journey. It always comes back to journey.
Always. Oh, well. But again, thank you.
Don't stop believing.
Don't stop believing. Okay.
No, thank you both. I mean, I think, like the fact that you do this and that, that you allow people to tell their story, but also I think like, to kind of touch on aspects that maybe we don't think about or that we don't talk about, or that, it kind of opens it up a little bit in a different way. I think, I appreciate that you guys do that, not just with me, but like when you do, with everyone that you interview. I think it's, because we can all kind of tell the same story and then it gets old, but I think like kind of focusing on other areas of, who we are as people, I think is important. So I appreciate you guys doing that.
it is interesting. People's stories are similar but different. And so I think there's
Yeah.
always, but what's lovely is that in every story, I think people can see a bit of themselves. And so, and that's what we're all looking for. We all want to belong.
Yeah.
Even if it's not something we asked for. That's one of the reasons why we love doing this, is because we want people to feel like they're not alone in this word journey. So I'm going to get a thesaurus and look this up.
Yes.
Anyway, Rocio, again, thank you so very much. Thank you everybody else for joining us, and cheers. Or
cheers.
Salud.
Salud. Hi, this is Rocio. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it with your friends.